Hello there and welcome to another live chapter reading for Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today I shall be reading from Ouroboros, Antipodes Book 3 by T.S. Simons. Chapter 1. Mooring the small fishing boat in the harbour at Kirkwall, I paused, wondering what sort of reception I would receive. Had I made a mistake in coming here? The last time I visited the Orkney community was almost a year ago, and for vastly different reasons. Knowing how to open the access hatches in the geodesic domes that protected us from infected rain, a raiding party had kidnapped 11 women to enslave, my wife Lee being among them. In pursuit, we're a full day behind. Our crew had stopped here briefly and had been welcomed. A quick meal, a précis of our mission, the 3 volunteers to join us, and we were on our way. I had been in no fit state to communicate on our return voyage. When we had returned, the 6 abducted Orcadian women, reeling from the violent death of my wife Letitia at the hands of the raiders and battling a severe infection, I hadn't left the cabin of our vessel. As I slowly entered the village, I could see people watching me from a distance, apprehensively knowing that the people here were likely as wary of strangers as the residents in my home community on the Hebridean island of Lewis were. I entered with my hands in front of me, indicating that I held no weapon. Cautiously approaching, I was about to call out a greeting when a tall, shadowy figure spoke inquiringly towards me. "Cam?" "Aye," I responded and looked over to see the male speaker. The afternoon sun was behind him, the glare in my face making me squint. "Will?" I guessed hopefully as I stepped further forward and into the shade of the home's eaves. A wide grin crossed his face as he extended his arm. "How are you, Cam? So good to see you. You've recovered all right then?" Grateful for the warm welcome, I smiled. "I'm well, thank you. My profuse thanks to you and the antibiotics and painkillers. They undoubtedly saved my life." "Our pleasure, and it was a fair price too. We never got the chance to thank you personally for returning our friends. I heard your wife didn't make it." "No, she didn't." "I'm sorry, man. I can't imagine what that feels like." "Hell is what it feels like," I thought with fresh pain piercing my chest, making me want to double over from the stabbing sensation, but said nothing. "Not that we aren't thrilled to see you, Campbell, but I assume you haven't come all this way for a random neighbourly call. Is there something we can do for you?" Even after all these years, I still appreciated the direct Scottish approach. There was no beating around the bush with the social niceties. People just asked and you responded. "Out with it then. I was hoping, if you don't mind, to speak with them, the women that were taken, if that is okay. I just need some closure." Will paused and I waited as he responded haltingly. "I'm not sure, Cam. It has taken them a long time to deal with what happened. I know it has been a year, but they are still struggling with nightmares and flashbacks. Most of them still cannot leave the village, but for you I will ask, okay?" Realising that this was the best I could expect, I nodded agreement. "You can stay with us. I'll let Liesl know." A small group had gathered, interested in the newcomer. They were watching us apprehensively, but had visibly relaxed as they saw Will shake my hand enthusiastically, chatter springing up among them. Will turned to reintroduce me to the community here, and the look of fear broke on many faces as they recognised me. Several people approached to thank me, genuinely appreciative of my role in the rescue, small as my part had been. A small woman stood slightly apart from the group that had gathered. She looked familiar, but out of place here. Dark hair tied back in a ponytail, she was tiny, delicate, with features like a bird. Classically beautiful, with pale skin, sparkling blue eyes enhanced by her dark lashes and brows. I hadn't seen her last time I was here, but that was hardly surprising, focused on the rescue. Was she one of the rescued women? I had only seen them as they came out of the broch, filthy and scared, their hands still tied until Freya could cut their bonds in the daylight. Racking my brain, I couldn't place her. Why did I know her? Realisation struck as I recognised her as the tiny bird-like woman with the booming voice from my briefing session in Melbourne, Military Budgie. What the hell was she doing on Orkney? Then again, I realised in the next instant the same thing could be asked of me. Once the crowd had dispersed after Will's introduction, she made her approach quite forcefully. "I'm Illyria," she choked pleasantly, thrusting her hand out. "Campbell, isn't it?" "It is, but please, Cam." I wondered if she remembered me or she had just heard about what happened. "We've met before," I started cautiously. "Well, not really. You were part of the team in Melbourne." "Oh, I remember you. The deployment team discussed each candidate at length, so I feel like I know you. Wonderful to meet you." "You talked about us?" "Well, of course. Days were spent choosing candidates. Did you think we would just let anyone survive?" "True enough. "How did you end up here?" I blurted, realising as the words left my mouth that it was quite rude. She laughed again, a warm, charming laugh. Despite her booming voice that day, she was lovely and easy to speak to. They seconded me to the department, for the project. Military, I guessed. Major Morgan, intelligence officer, Australian Army, she saluted in formal greeting. What gave it away? Honestly, your voice. I had never heard such a commanding voice from someone so tiny, I confessed. A learnt skill, she twinkled at me with her brilliant blue eyes, the dark lashes gleaming in the sun, and one I used many times with new recruits. They offered me a place on Auckland Island with the scientific community, then travelled through to Clava. Now tell me, how did you get here? Though it's not your first visit, I understand. Will, realising that we were going to be a while, took the backpack I had left on the ground, caught my eye and gestured into a nearby house before disappearing through the door. Up close, I realised she couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. She just appeared more worldly. Intelligent and with a razor-sharp wit, nothing got past her, reminded me very much of Freya. But I hadn't spoken with another Australian in some time, outside to my immediate family and Freya, and I was enjoying doing so just now. We spoke of Melbourne, August and Auckland, the portals, and how awful they were. The differences between Australia and Scotland, words we found amusing, strange customs. If you were in the Clava community, why did you come here? I asked, somewhat cautiously as we re-entered the village. As lovely as she was, we didn't really know each other. Let's just say I didn't entirely agree with some of their decisions. Besides, I had personal reasons to come here. I must have looked confused as she laughed. My parents were from Kirkwall. They migrated to Australia before I was born, but I has always wanted to visit here. After I graduated from university and went up to Duntroon, well, my military career took up all of my time. Now I live here. You weren't here when I last visited, I quizzed. While I hadn't met everyone here, I was certain I would have remembered her. Military trained, she would have been an asset in our retrieval of the captive women from Musa. Freya would have certainly roped her in to assist. No, I first came about 18 months ago just to visit, test the waters, you could say. Then I moved permanently about 8 months ago. What does an intelligence officer do on an island community? I asked, genuinely interested. Not much, she laughed delightfully, but here I started a market of sorts, based on a barter system. 4 days a week I travel to different areas of the community, collecting excess produce for trade. I facilitate the trade, and I get to keep a small percentage of the goods, so it keeps me fed and clothed, and everyone else gets to maximise their time doing what they do best. That sounds like a great idea, I said enthusiastically, and I meant it. Lewis would have loved something like this. Now that the community was widespread, to have someone travel between settlements to take your excess produce and trade it for other items was a fantastic idea. It sounds like a great idea when you have no skills, she giggled merrily, but they all seem happily enough. Making plans to accompany her on her rounds during my stay and excusing myself, I entered the house Will had entered, a little tentatively. I didn't want to barge into their private space, but I could hear low voices followed by the sound standing hesitantly in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. Will looked up and smiled and introduced me to his wife Liesl and their 2 children, Thor and little Thea. Thor, a rambunctious 4-year-old, was racing around the kitchen like a tornado, much to Liesl's frustration, and barely gave me a second glance. Thea, a golden-haired 2-year-old, blinked at me with fascination before handing me her knitted teddy. I thanked her profusely, and after introducing myself formally to the bear, solemnly returned it to her, watching a look of self-satisfaction cross her chubby cheeks. With her sharp green eyes and blonde curls, she looked just like I expected Catherine to look at the same age. Highly intelligent and testing people who came into her sphere to see if they measured up to her expectations. Invited to clean up by Liesl, I did so with gusto. Days spent on a boat with no clean water for washing meant I was desperate for a shower, even if it was a barely lukewarm dripping shower. If only I had known that I would never again get to have a shower with water pressure again, I would have enjoyed it much more, recalling the hot, forceful showers of my original home, Melbourne. It had been 6 years since the waterborne virus had spread from Europe and killed every living thing through simple dehydration, but the result had been no person, plant or animal had survived. The exception was a few thousand of us who had been lucky enough to be chosen to live in a domed community, a terrarium of sorts where the water was safe. We lived in communities of shared resources, but with limited contact with the outside world. Since I had been ensconced in my new world, I had travelled more than most, but I had not yet seen life outside of these dome communities, the exception being Musa, a tiny island off the coast of the Shetlands where the raiders had taken the kidnapped women, the journey that had previously brought me here. Leaving the bathroom, Will gestured me towards the table, and I soon found myself tucking in to a delicious vegetable soup with fresh bread. "This is so good. How I have missed fresh vegetables," I gushed, making Liesl blush with pride. Eating with children was something I was surprised to find that I also missed after days alone, and enjoying helping Thea with her spoon, Liesl enjoying the break from parenting for a short time. It was a sense of sublime relaxation that came with being back in a protected environment that I hadn't expected, no longer needing to worry about getting caught in the rain, eating something contaminated, or constantly suiting up to avoid having a random wave splash into my face. That bone-deep sense of intrinsically knowing I was safe. If my attention lapsed for a second, it wouldn't be life-threatening. 18 months ago, I had travelled back to Australia to find my sister Saoirse, who had lived in an inland isolated community. The first leg had been through the Antipodal point back to August, my original settlement, then by boat to New Zealand and Australia. On our way back to Scotland, Saoirse and I had stopped at our old holiday property where our parents had isolated themselves after the pandemic had struck Melbourne, and it was impossible to get food, fuel or safe water. It had been a time when people were raiding shops, attacking neighbours and breaking into houses to survive. It was clear from the freshness of their remains that our parent had survived for some years after the virus had struck, but had died after eating contaminated fruit. The handmade dome my father had built from tarpaulins had developed a minuscule tear that had allowed water to pass through, but it made me wonder how many people still survived outside of the geodesic domes. After a blissful night spent in an actual bed, a hand-carved wooden car being driven up my leg woke me. Liesl found Thor and I sitting in the guest room floor some time later, racing clouds along the tracks made from shoes and my belt. Thea insisted I sit with Holly, her teddy, at breakfast, chattering away to me the entire time while Liesl made tatty scones. Will spent the next 2 days showing me around their community and introducing me, and ensuring that everyone we spoke to knew my role in saving the abducted women. We had returned all the Orcadian women unharmed, Letitia the sole female casualty, although the raiders had killed 3 men on Lewis, who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Despite her pleasantness and appreciation of the time spent with her children, I sensed Liesl was apprehensive around me. Assuming that she was shy, I was polite but didn't push. Perhaps like me, she enjoyed the solitude of her own home. I had shown up unannounced, and it wasn't till after dinner on the third lie, after their children had gone to bed, that she admitted, highly embarrassed, that she had initially feared me. Will and I looked at her in amazement. "Elise told me you went ballistic," she admitted, "when you heard your wife had died." Flushing, I had no reply. I had been told this by Freya, but honestly recalled nothing about that time. I remembered one woman telling me that Leigh hadn't stopped screaming, so they had slit her throat. After that, my memory went blank. Will looked at her nonplussed. "And you don't think I would lose my shit if I was told that they had murdered my wife?" Liesl blushed at that. "Maybe. It was just they made it sound like Cam was an animal and completely out of control." "I was," I admitted quietly, releasing that honesty was best. "Literally out of my mind with grief. Nearly 4 years ago, my first wife went missing. I spent a year searching for her. I didn't think I ever would survive the loss, the bone-deep grief of losing someone I loved that much. I didn't think I could live without her, and honestly, I wanted to die. It took me a very long time to recover. But then I met Letitia, the sweetest, kindest woman I'd ever met. I fell in love again, and we married. Now we have a son, Louis. He had just turned 1 when those men took her. On her birthday, she was 5 months pregnant with our second child. After Lee went missing, I spent days not eating or sleeping, just desperate to catch up to them, to find her, then to learn that they had murdered her. Those animals had killed our baby too. I admit I lost control. The truth is, I remember nothing after being told how she died. I woke up fevered on the yacht. The other women all safe, but not her." Will sniffed. "Mate, the way I hear it from Jerry, you were restrained. I'm not sure that there would have been a man left alive if that had been Liesl or my child." Liesl reddened further as Will reached over the table to take his wife's hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, half-choked. "I didn't know." After making the initial introductions, Will returned to his work in charge of the fish farm. While invited to accompany him, it was something I could not bring myself to do. Fishing had never been my favourite pastime, unable to kill the thrashing fish on the hook or in a net. Recognising that the women need some time before being comfortable enough to speak to me, and simply being here in their faces might be confronting, most days I spent with Illyria. She took me travelling across the community, meeting the different families, learning bits and pieces about what they raised, grew, and how they lived. I shared information from August and Lewis. Things that grew well, companion planting tips from Diana. Illy's military training came through occasionally, and I saw the leader in her. It was never blatant. She was helpful and had a natural way with people, able to adapt her communication style to her audience. In the end, it was Illy that advocated on my behalf to convince the 6 women to speak to me, something they were reticent to do. After Liesel's confession, I knew why. As I accompanied her on her rounds and learned the basics of her business, I recognised it was a fantastic concept. One farmer had a surplus of pumpkins, another of wool. Illyria took a minor cut of each item but passed the rest on to others. They gifted those with skills like doctors and engineers with their goods in exchange for their service to the community. Those who gave away their surplus got to choose from other produce. Everyone seemed happy with the arrangement. It really is a terrific system, I told her, but how do you keep everyone happy? That is where my psychology training comes in. She grinned, recognising how much people are prepared to donate, reading them if you like. Everyone is willing to trade, but to differing levels. Some are exceedingly generous, prepared to give away all their excess and not want anything in return. Others want something in return. Every time. A fair trade, you could call it. A small number want to feel that they have gained from the trade, that it was in their favour. It's about ensuring that everyone feels like they're getting a good deal, not taking advantage of the generous ones, and ensuring that the tight asses feel rewarded. Most of all, the trick is to keep absolutely everything confidential. Let no one know what trade you have done with another. Well, from what I saw, you were doing an amazing job, I admitted. It keeps me busy and fed. I hope you enjoyed listening to this chapter reading and that you'll go check out the book. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.